Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 15 of my 2022 reads. This week was a really good week, not just in terms of how much I enjoyed the books, but also because I read quite a few things that are on my own TBR, which is one of my goals for this year, although I did DNF one of them. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, I finished Infomocracy by Malka. This is a book that I buddy read with Angela at Literature Science Alliance. And if you don't know Angela already, you should definitely check out her channel. She does really, really great content, especially around SFF. She reads so many different things, backlists, new releases, great, really wide reading taste within SFF. And just, I always love hearing what she has to say. And I really liked buddy reading this with her because it was definitely something that took me a little bit to get into, and having her there to chat with and to discuss made it so much more engaging. Kind of got me through the slow part of the beginning of the book, and then it was just so fun to discuss as we went along. So the basic storyline of this book is that we're in the future, I think 2060, and there's a lot of technological advancements, but there's also a lot of advancements in terms of politics. So this is just as much political speculative fiction as it is science speculative fiction. And in this world, there's this thing called microdemocracy, where every group, a sentinel or 100,000 people, get to vote for a government. And so you have all of these little microdemocracies where each of these 100,000 people has their own government. And some governments are elected by multiple sentinels across the world. Some are just, very insular, just one or two. But it's all about this process of elections. So we're coming up on the once a decade election where all of these sentinels get to elect their governments, and there's a lot of political intrigue going on. And we're following a couple of characters, one who's a campaigner for one of these governments, another who is this really very, very talented, almost spy type person who works for information, which is this system that makes sure everybody is informed and kind of like does fact checking, all that sort of stuff, so that they can be informed voters. And there is so much political intrigue and kind of conspiracies, and it's basically like a spy espionage thriller, which I think if you're into that, it'll be really engaging. I'm not so into espionage thrillers, but even so, I found myself pretty intrigued and wanting to know what was going to happen. I think the world building in this is super cool. A lot of the ideas about government are really cool. So other than the slow start and the fact that I'm just not so big into espionage thrillers, I think that this just had so much interesting stuff going on for it. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read The President and the Frog by Carolina de Robertis. This is I guess you could call it sort of a historical fiction. It basically takes place around 2016 in Uruguay, although the country isn't mentioned. And there is a European news reporter who is coming to interview the old president of this country. And this president is famous for being a very down-to-earth guy, just lives a normal daily life, but used to be a revolutionary, used to be somebody who was imprisoned for a very long time by the previous dictatorship. And so she's interviewing him, and we're getting this from his perspective, jumping back and forth between that interview and his memories of the past, and especially that time in incarceration where he was in solitary confinement for years at a time and really struggled to kind of deal with the effects of that on his mental health and sort of trying to find purpose and meaning. This is told in a very lyrical, very beautiful way that is also very stream of consciousness. The writing is really unique in terms of its style, and it's also kind of very strange and surreal at a lot of times. He has this frog that he talks to while he's in solitary confinement, and the frog is kind of a jerk, and just their banter back and forth sometimes goes very confusing. But it still has a lot of really beautiful writing and a lot of really interesting themes, a lot of interesting discussions of what is the purpose of life and how do we keep going even when things are really tough. And this is very much framed around the 2016 elections in the US and, what sense to make out of that. So I thought that the discussions in this were really great. I loved the themes, I loved the writing, but it was just very weird at times. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished The Politeness of Princes by P.G. Wodehouse. This is a collection of short stories about these schoolboys that my husband Sush read me out loud as a bedtime story. We're working through all of P.G. Wodehouse, and I really enjoyed this collection. I actually really think that P.G. Wodehouse's schoolboy stories are some of his best. He gets to have these really funny and obnoxious and outrageous characters, these teenage boys who get into all kinds of antics, and this was such a fun collection. You have a boy who is trying all sorts of very ridiculous methods to help him wake up on time because he keeps being late to school, and just all sorts of other things. I thought that this was lots of fun, very absurd, lots of kind of comedy of error types of humor, which really works for me in P.G. Wodehouse. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this. If you're looking for kind of like a classic work, this was probably in the 1930s or actually maybe even earlier, that is just fun and lighthearted, this is a great one. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This is actually probably the only Neil Gaiman novel that I had yet to read, so I was really happy to get this off of my physical owned TBR shelf. And this is a book that was adapted into a movie, I think in the early 2000s, and I loved that movie, and I've seen it multiple times. So I was not really sure what to expect going into the book, like how close it would be, etc. It actually is very, very close to the movie, but the writing is just so beautiful. So even though I kind of had to struggle to keep the scenes in the movie out of my mind while reading it, the writing itself just brought me in so much. It's kind of a dark fairy tale of a boy from the human world who goes into this world of the fairy to catch a falling star, who happens to be a woman, and she kind of hurt her leg when she was falling as well. And there's a lot of other people after her, especially some witches. So it is a world filled with so much magic. I just loved the writing style in this, and the way that the story unfolds is really great. The way that it also brings in a lot of like nursery rhymes from the human world and what it means in the fairy world and just all the different creatures. And yeah, I just thought it was so much fun. I loved the movie and I loved the book too. The only thing that I didn't like about the book was how violent it was. There are some battle scenes, and I think that somehow in the movie it wasn't as violent and gory for me, but in the book it was really quite gory, and that was intense, and I did not like the gore. But other than that, I thought this was an excellent book. So if you like fairy tales, you should for sure pick this one up. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I did DNF one book, which was Eleanor Roosevelt Volume 1 by Blanche Wiesen Cook. This is a book that Sush, my husband, got for me years ago because I was really interested in reading about Eleanor Roosevelt, and so he got me this biography trilogy as a gift on ebook, and I'd been meaning to get to it. But that was, he gave me that before I joined BookTube, and after I joined BookTube, just my TBR kind of exploded, and I always have so many other things to read. But this year I'm trying to get through my owned TBR, and so I picked up this book and started reading it, and I got through 23%, and this book is totally fine. Like, it is doing a good job of talking about Eleanor Roosevelt's life, but I was finding myself a little bored. I think that the writing style of this, the sort of lens through which Blanche Wiesen Cook writes as well, is just not so much in line with what I'm interested in. There's, especially the beginning book, you know, it's talking about Eleanor Roosevelt's childhood and these sorts of things, and just the amount of time that is spent on other tangential things is okay, but I'm just not that interested in it. And I realized that I wasn't really looking forward to continuing with this, and especially not continuing with the whole trilogy. And I think that part of that is also just my interests have changed. I've heard a couple of booktubers talk about how they really want to get their TBR down because they find that they're most interested in reading books right after they've gotten them. But if you wait a few years, then sometimes your tastes change. And I think that that's part of what has happened. I'm just not as interested in prioritizing reading some of these older biographies. So I think that if you're interested in a biography about Eleanor Roosevelt, this is a great one to pick up. But I think that it's just not fitting in with where I want my reading to be right now. And I was a little bit bored reading it. So I'm going to let this one go. But I think that that's nothing bad against the book, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's everything that I read and DNF this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you have any thoughts, or if you read anything good this week yourself, go ahead and leave me a comment down below.